Okay, welcome back for the final time. Really looking forward to this last panel of the day, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce an old friend, Fred Langford. He's the Director of Trust and Safety and Technology at Ofcom, and for many years was the Deputy CEO at the Internet Watch Foundation. I believe I first met you in 2004?
I think it was around then. Yeah.
Around that time. Okay, we're dating ourselves here. Needless to say, he brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise in this field, and I believe uniquely qualified to help us scope out the future. So good luck, Fred.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you very much, everybody. So we're here. We're going to be talking about navigating the future of online safety. I mean, that's we're going to be able to cover that in an hour really easily. But thankfully, I've got a fantastic panel here as well. So I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and just say a little bit about where they're from and what they do. So first, I'm going to pass over to Julie.
Thanks, Fred. I'm Julie de Bayencourt. I've been in the tech industry for, I think, 25 years. I'm French. I've been living in Ireland for 27, so you'll hear this lovely French-Irish twang. I've worked for a number of startups and then kind of fell into the UGC world. I've worked for Meta for 10 years in a number of roles, and then hopped over to TikTok 3.5 years ago. And there I lead the product policy team. That's the team that makes the rules for what we allow on the platform, which is never boring. Just leave it at that.
Hi, I'm Ian Drennan. I'm Executive Director of We Protect Global Alliance, which is the largest and most diverse network focused on ending child sexual abuse online. Prior to working for We Protect Global Alliance, I was a civil servant doing a number of roles, most recently leading the UK's international response to child sexual abuse.
Brilliant. My name's Alex. I'm Deputy CEO at the Diana Awards. We're a legacy to Princess Diana's belief that young people have the power to change the world, and we recognise changemakers across the globe aged 9 to 25. I believe your brother's friend received one, and Trisha, you are a Diana Award recipient, so I'm in really good company. And we do a number of programs around empowering youth, particularly around things like online safety, bullying prevention. And I actually was very optimistic, 21-year-old, and wrote to Facebook, got a reply, ended up in a small office in Covent Garden when they only had 10 employees, can you believe that? And eventually started working with Julie and team all those years ago at Meta. And I'm a big believer in trying to bring young people into those spaces to make sure that they're listened to and they're heard.
Hi, everyone. My name is Trisha Prabhu, and I'm the founder and CEO of Rethink. And we are a global movement with the mission of tackling cyberbullying and redefining internet culture to be more positive. The way that we do that is we create technology, education, advocacy, all centered on giving youth the skills they need to interact more intentionally and more critically in digital spaces. Like Alex, I first got into the work as a young person. So I'm 23, started the work when I was 13, came out of my own experience seeing bullying, online bullying in particular, affecting friends, people in my community, other young people, and feeling frustrated that there weren't youth voices that were part of the conversation about youth safety. We talk a lot about youth safety, but we often don't see youth in those spaces. I really wanted to change that. I wanted there to be a youth perspective. And we've heard a lot about safety by design. I wanted to try and engineer safety by design. And so that's a lot of the work that we do at Rethink today.
Thank you very much. So this session is, as I've said, is around emerging horizons, and I wanted to put it to the panel. So in the write-up, it said, as tech evolves and iterates, what does the future hold? So I know that's a bit of an open question. I'll probably go back to front. So I can ask you, Trisha, first. What do you think the future holds for technology? I mean, we heard a lot about generative AI, and we were talking in the wings beforehand about how things are changing. But what do you think the future holds as far as those technical developments and some of the things that you've seen online in the past? Thinking a bit generative AI, what you've learned in the past, to looking into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big question, right? Yep. This is kind of the $1 million question, right? Is what does tech hold? I mean, we talked a lot about the possibilities for AI to influence content moderation. I think that's definitely going to be a part of it, and that was, a big part of the conversation earlier. I mean, I think it's also important to think a little bit about, what does technology hold, but also, how will technology and the people who are influencing it change and evolve? I think that there's going to be a lot more space for new voices, especially young voices, to be a part of that conversation. I think Web 3.0 offers us that opportunity, right? That wasn't necessarily an opportunity that we entirely engaged in, 2 decades ago. I think we have that opportunity now to really have those conversations and bring people in to be a part of those conversations. So I'm excited to see how that changes and evolves, especially as it relates to content moderation and figuring out what the rules should be. So I think that'll definitely be a part of it.
Thank you. And Alex, in your world, putting your crystal ball in front of you, where do you see the future taking us?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'm lucky to sit on a couple of the sort of trust and safety councils for some of the platforms, and some of them are really exciting because, for example, I sit on Spotify's Global Trust and Safety Council, and they're really having to grapple with decisions around not just content but also artistic expression, and had the most fascinating conversation about drill music, which is sort of sub-genre of rap music, and I'm a bit biased because when I was before this job, I was a head of house. In Harry Potter they have houses. Well, I worked in a school. I was looking after 180 children, and in my house was a rapper called Central C. Government name Oakley, and we had a lot of conversations about sort of drill music, and that came up, I think, around law enforcement requests that police were receiving, and the bias that maybe the Met Police had in trying to remove Black British culture sort of music, so I think there's going to be a lot more sort of cultural decisions that we're going to have to grapple with. I really liked Trish's point around maybe new voices coming into that conversation. I think there's hugely important. But I'm also always struck by, I think it was a stat that the Anti-Defamation League put out around the scale of moderation, and it was if a platform has sort of 1 billion users and if they each post once a day and the platform manages to 99% of the time accurately moderate in terms of adhering to its policies, that content is still going to leave up sort of 10 million errors a day. And those 10 million errors are not just errors, they're human beings that are going through lived experience, perhaps it's harm or misinformation on the platform. So I think there's something really interesting about the scale of moderation, and when perhaps AI or machine will get to the point of being able to understand banter, and particular British humour. I think it's quite a hard thing. Some of you, unfortunately, have probably had some awkward conversations with me already. I can just put it down to my British humour. But I think, I'm really excited when that perhaps solves it, because I do feel that there isn't that understanding really. Like we can have regulation, we can have some of that stuff that's going to go through Parliament, but it's not ultimately going to solve some of the scale issues that I think there are.
Absolutely, and if you add that on a global scale, and you're talking about in a very regional scale, it's even more exacerbated. And to you, Ian, and possibly some of the more heinous end of what activity takes place online from a We Protect perspective.
Well, I mean, I think it's what you just said about the international dimension is a brilliant segue. I mean, I think you look, we've got 101 governments as part of our alliance, and there's a huge diversity of experience, of levels of development in terms of legislation, in terms of regulation. But it is in regions of Africa, Asia, Middle East, Latin America, where you're seeing rates of digital connectivity for young people going up like a hockey stick. It's incredible, and therefore, the technology is leapfrogging. So people are going potentially from having no access to the internet at all to having everything in their pocket on a smartphone without those kind of safety measures, without those guardrails. And the crime type we're looking at is borderless. You can have a victim in one country, you can have a perpetrator in another country. They can be using a platform headquartered in a third country entirely. So I think national level responses, or thinking purely nationally, isn't going to be sufficient. And also picking up on your point, Alex, you're talking about British humour, like, what about Tamil humor based in a particular province of Sri Lanka, which is different from a province in southern India, but, capturing that nuance at that very, very sophisticated level, to enable people to express themselves in their own language and in their own way, and to maintain that authenticity. So I think we're going to see very soon the implications of that globalization of digital access coming down the track. I think it's been a bit of an Anglosphere for a long time. That's going to change very, very soon. And we need to be ready for that in terms of how we approach our response to online safety.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And Julie, from an industry view, TikTok, what is TikTok thinking about in the future? And because you will be thinking about this not only from a safety perspective, but from a commercial perspective as well. So you might have a bit more of an idea about where things are heading for platforms.
Wow, I can't speak on the commercial side. I think it's just unleashing a tremendous amount of opportunities on all sides, right? From opportunities to abuse to opportunities to create and launch new products. What I'm excited about is that I think through some of these changes, we can make the scale issue of moderation probably a little bit smaller. So being able to automate or remove things which are easier, and then having more time spent on, Tamil humor or, Dave and drill, and making sure that people take the right action on this content. I also love the fact that, as things are shifting from a very US-driven perspective a few years ago, we have an opportunity to really listen to those voices. And these are not consumers just receiving a product that hasn't been designed for them, but that they also have the ability to shape what the product looks like, and just be really strong in demanding fair moderation, transparency of decision. So I think this is what I think it can unlock, and that's what I think we can aspire to go to. But
so a really optimistic view there. Which
I choose to be cautiously optimistic, but still to see the good side of things.
Well, that works well into my next set of questions, and I'm interested because of that sort of view, and we've heard all sorts of different opinions throughout the day about who has different roles and responsibilities. But I'm interested just to break that down a little bit. And I'll start with you, Julie, because you're from TikTok. What role and responsibility do you see industry having, particularly in shaping the future of online safety?
A big one. I think this is all about shared conversations and sharing the load. That is, getting people on a service, making sure that they are safe. So from our perspective, I'm not going to mention safety by design for the 20th time today, but it is very much part of what needs to happen. It's not an aspiration. It needs to be in place so that, the product feels intuitive and entertaining and fun, but that you have all the safeguards in place. I think that's important that we do this. I also have a perspective as a mum, which has been evolving over the years since, my child has been aging as well. But I feel in a way that perhaps this is just a generational gap, but parents or older generation approach things from a perspective of fear and wanting to protect, where I think we need to embrace, again, curiosity and the ability to have conversations, because whatever the platform du jour is, whatever next app or next service comes into place that will get everybody excited, the questions still remain the same. Like, is it suitable for you? Do they have good practices? When things go wrong, who can you turn to? Is it manned by somebody? And those questions, I think, need to be resolved through discussion, and that parents should not be afraid of it, but just embrace the basic 4 or 5 questions related to new services.
It reminds me of something Stephen was saying at the beginning, actually, just about the pace of change and the news and technology. How do industry stay up to date with the pace of change? I know some of it comes from industry, but just how do you adapt quickly and be agile in those sorts of messages that you're giving to parents?
I think again, that's a personal belief that regardless of what happens, you need to approach things perhaps again with critical thinking and the ability to ask those questions. The pace is insane. It's not going to slow down. There's rarely a month that goes by without something new, something popping up. I think approaching it with calm and being level-headed in trying to unpack this, but the pace is,
Yes.
the face is crazy.
You remind me a little of a conversation we were having earlier, just saying that today's been a lot of generative AI, and we were saying, well, what happened to metaverse? That was last year. And what's coming next year? Because obviously that's what we're talking about. But thank you. And Ian, I'm interested in your view. You work with a lot of governments, obviously. What role and responsibility do you think particularly governments have in shaping the future of online safety?
I think it's a really, really important role, and I think it's in terms of having an understanding of the problem as a series of different capabilities that need to be addressed. So it's not purely around, in our space, enforcement, takedown, that law enforcement type approach. That's important, definitely, but it's one capability amongst many. So we just put out today, in fact, you can look at our website and have a look at a maturity model, looking at our model national response for government. So at national level, kind of what are the different stages, right from building up through to a level of maturity, and different governments are going to be at different stages along that journey. But I think two things to pull out in particular. One, there is a need for regulation. We heard that loud and clear from Courtney. I think there's a strong voice for it from civil society. I think also whenever we speak to parents and children, there's a need for that. So regulation as a kind of baseline, to be seen as a floor, not a ceiling, so something to be built on, but to have that common ground. And then also just to really emphasize a preventative approach and for resources to follow that. So if you look at the amount of resources that go in for, as I say, that law enforcement response, which again, I'm not undermining it, it's incredibly important, but if you compare the amount that's going in for that compared to what's going into preventative measures, it's not even comparable. That needs to be switched right around because you need to stop the harm before it happens. You need to look at those points of pressure where you can design out the harm, where you can help people to be more resilient, but also not putting all the pressure on children, parents, caregivers. I think it's a shared responsibility.
Mm. And I'm interested for Alex and Tricia at the end, really, to hear about your views about stakeholders, because you sort of touched on it both as we were talking at the beginning. What role and who are those stakeholders that, as you see it? Because I've mentioned industry and government, and civil society obviously is another area of government, but I want another area that needs to be involved. But I'm interested in, I'll probably start with Tricia here. Who are those stakeholders and how can they get engaged?
I mean, I think industry and government definitely are key stakeholders. I think the question to ask is, what responsibility do they have to invite other folks that have lived experience and perspective into the conversation, and to do that in a way that is not just performative, but actually substantive, right? You have, a lot of settings where, maybe a young person is invited in, or maybe someone, that actually understands how these problems manifest on a day-to-day basis because they're using the platform or the technology on a day-to-day basis. It's in the room, but maybe they don't have the agency, maybe they don't have the ultimate authority, right? The real decision-making power. I think we're actually starting to see a shift. I mean, having done the work for so long, we're starting to see a shift where starting to see, governments, regulatory agencies, companies inviting people in, wanting to have those conversations, which I think is really positive. And even at times, what's really exciting for me is seeing companies fund young innovators who have an idea and they want to go and build something. They have a vision for what they think the digital world should look like. That's incredible, right? And so it's what kinds of responsibilities do we have to have not just companies and governments, spearheading change, but recognizing that they have resources that they can put behind others who are interested in spearheading change. I think that's a really, really critical question to ask. And the beauty of it is, at the end, we all win, right? Because now we have a number of diverse perspectives, considering a number of potential solutions. Even if a couple of those pan out and work really well, we are all better for it. So I think that's one really key question to ask. Another thing I'll just note is I think education is really, really important. And here I think about, as a young person growing up, there's a huge expectation. Young people know how to use technology so well. They're so digitally savvy. That's very true, but there's a huge difference between being digitally savvy and being digitally literate, right? Huge difference between those two things. And so what do we owe to youth to set them up to be responsible digital citizens, right? So much of the structure and the framework that we have in place today is give young people a device and just hope they know how to swim. And that's, to me, it has never made a lot of sense. So I think we also need to think about how we're actually designing the infrastructure that young people step into the first time they get on a device or the first time they get online, right? What is there to support them? Part of that's going to come from industry, part of that's going to come from government in terms of the direct things that they're direct tools, right? Again, laws, policies, right, tools, but there are also indirect ways that they can support, hopefully, to create a broader ecosystem so young people can turn to amazing nonprofits, so young people have access to basic education on how to use devices responsibly in schools. But I think we need to see those changes happening too. And I think if we do, hopefully we can set them up to be safe and smart online. But Alex, I'm curious, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, really good points. I think we've got to have young people in the room for these discussions, because I think while I'm an NGO, I think quite often it's just easy just to speak to the NGO and think, well, they represent young people. And some of the best conversations I had over my career have been sort of or sort of realizations being when young people have been in the room. And yesterday I was at Meta with some young people, and we were talking about social media, and they were actually talking about TikTok and how they really appreciate the timeout function and the prompt, the reminder. But they were like, but you know what you should do, even though this is Meta, young people just wanted to tell anyone in the room, well, you know what you should do? You should be able to personalize your timeout reminder to say, don't forget about that essay, or you've got to go and pick up your brother in an hour or something like that. And I thought, that's such a good point. And it reminds me of sitting with Julie in a former job and young people sort of talking about very simple things like, actually, have you thought about Meta when you decide to report someone, maybe you want to block them as well, have that automatic prompt, or even I remember the language, which language is so important, particularly listening to young people. They found the word report such a big deal, and it was too dramatic as a word. So they said, well, actually, we'd probably describe an issue that we have on the platform as having a problem with it. So, Meta trialed that language for under 18s of changing it to, I have a problem with this post, and saw a big increase with reports. So I think, language really, really matters. And even linked with that, a lot of young people tell me to stop using the word cyberbullying. Because they don't know what cyberspace is. And when I reflect on it, cyber sex, cyber security, very different from what it used to be, right? So I think it is outdated, and I think simple things like that probably just remind you that you do need young people who are living and breathing technology in that room, and that it's really important to have their voice and engage them, because they come up with much brighter ideas than I can alone.
Thank you. And I think you're pretty picking up. We're all quite optimistic folk, and we're looking forward to the future. And I'm just picking up on what you were saying there, actually, Alex, I'm thinking about product time frames. By the time something starts out and it's rolled out, the people that you're talking about, the kids using them, are going to be probably considered a little bit old for those new products by the time they actually get released. So how potentially, using your previous experience in schools, where do you think we could actually get people to be educated about the things that are coming over the horizon, rather than just appearing right in front of them and using them?
Yeah, I think that's a hugely interesting question, and I think there is, to your point, a bit of a gap into sort of literacy and access to that. I want to see more companies engage young people, but our stakeholders, in the ideation stage of some of these things, because I am aware, not with anyone on this panel, but other companies, perhaps things maybe happen to the trust and safety team still. Like, maybe someone thought that AI in a chatbot was a great idea and didn't think about bringing it to a council first, potentially. So I think sometimes you still see that, and I think that does affect issues. But I think maybe to your point around, I'm not sure how much you can prepare individual users for certain things on the horizon. But I do think companies maybe could go a lot further to gamify or incentivize understanding and education of the tools that are already there, because I think a lot of platforms have introduced some great features around things like blocking keywords, or particular safety settings like modes, but for the average user doesn't maybe know about those things. So I would be really interested in if you, and I think it would help with like transparency reporting and metrics, if you were able to talk about in those transparency reports how many users took it upon themselves to go through a very simple quiz or course to equip themselves around some of the features and have those stats. I think Discord, have done quite a good job with some of that. And I think particularly with moderation tools, I know TikTok for Live and Twitch, are now empowering the community to be able to moderate live streams, which I think is really important because we know peer-to-peer works very well. So, I think there's room for more sort of improvement on perhaps allowing users to show that they are interested in those sort of safety discussions and training. And whether you need a badge or not, some people might think it's a bit cringe if you see a badge that says someone's gone through it, but you could toggle it so it's on and off. But I do think users, and I certainly think like companies should go further with not just innovating the product and the tools, but also actually safety and having sort of educational courses or ways to gamify safety learning would be, a really interesting way. And I think it links to the sort of age verification bit with family linking, family accounts. I don't know at the moment what the incentive is to pair with your family member, why would you do that? But actually, if you flip it on its end, well, it's true. If you flip it on its end, actually, if you said to people, well, if you do this, and we're going to build the right experience for you in terms of enabling your parent to have a conversation and understand what the conversation looks like. But if you do this family link, or if you do this safety course, you would unlock this feature that no one else on the platform gets. Like, that's the sort of innovation I would be really excited to see from companies and platforms, actually making safety exciting and something that people want to opt into because it pays off for them, because they're helping to create the platform, make it safer and healthier. But I haven't seen that yet, so I'm really, really interested in taking it to that sort of level, because then I think it embeds it as part of the sort of platform.
Thank you. I think, Julie, I'm coming to you now as the industry person on the panel. I'm really interested in that youth in design phase concept, and like Alex said, in gamifying. And could you explain a little bit about TikTok's thought process around how you include youth? Because obviously you've got a lot of youth using your platform. How do you actually work to make sure that they are aware of what's coming, or they are part of that design phase?
Yeah, it's such a timely question. We just launched today our youth council. Well, we've announced that we're going to build a youth council for TikTok. I think coming back to Alex and Trisha's point, just making sure we really proactively listen to what young people are telling us, the ideas that they may have. I don't think we have seen a fraction of what online safety could look like, or some of the new features that could be deployed, because young people are living it every day and may think of new ways to connecting and enhancing what's already there. So I'm really excited to see what will come out from this group, to make sure that we don't just take a box. It's not a checkbox exercise, but we really build based on what they tell us. I think that's the exciting bit that we're announcing today. I'll pause for a second. Thank you.
And Trisha, I'm sure you've got lots of ideas from Rethink. How do you think that they could get involved at that beginning stage?
Yes. I think a number of things, so many great ideas have already, come up, but a number of things come to mind. One thing that I'll emphasize is, I think, the importance of by youth, for youth leadership, right? So young people listen to other young people, respond when it is fellow young people calling them to a cause, right? So how do we ensure that this is, to the point of trying to get people excited about something, right? What I've seen in my work with Rethink, I think part of the reason our work ended up being so successful is because I was a fellow young person talking about a lived challenge, right? A challenge that we had all experienced. So how do you bring more young people in a leadership capacity, right? Give them the agency, right? And then take what they're doing in that work and incorporate it into what's being built. I think that would be really powerful. That's something that I think is huge. I can't stress enough Alex's point about taking a preventative approach and bringing people in at the ideation stage. I think that is so key because I've had so many experiences where there is a problem that is not a problem per se, but maybe a concern that's really glaring, to a young person or to someone, with some perspective or background that just otherwise wouldn't be raised, right? Not because of any malintent, but just because it doesn't come up, right? Because it's not even on someone's radar. It's not even apparent, right? For instance, that, the word report would feel more serious than the word problem, right? It just, that wouldn't come up if you didn't have that perspective. So I think bringing them into the ideation phase, I think is key. This will sound like I'm like a personal self-benefit, but I do think that we should compensate young people for their time. So much of this work is done on a volunteer basis, and it ends up pushing a lot of young people, or it only allows some young people into the conversation. So I think from an equity perspective, I think that's really important. And then, from Rethink's perspective, it's funny, Rethink as an idea, when I first came up with the concept for the idea of Rethink, which it's an anti-cyberbullying app, I'm happy to talk about more, but when I first came up with the idea for it, our very first platform that we got some attention on was the Google Science Fair. So very fun connection all the way back when. That was where we were first validated and got a lot of attention, was out in Mountain View, was Google, who said, we really like this idea. We think it's super interesting, and we want to support you. So again, this idea of backing and funding and supporting young innovators who are coming up with ideas. I was just last week, the week prior, I was in at a retreat in the US that was focused on bringing together funders and youth leaders who are trying to create more responsible tech. And it was amazing to see these conversations, but also really incredible to speak with funders who had maybe never had a conversation like this before. Do you know what I mean? So I think the more that we can move in that direction, and the more that we can also support and meet young people where they're at, right? They may not have a formal organization. They may not have, it might be, right, something very informal, but meeting them where they're at and supporting them where they're at, helping them, providing them the resources to grow the work that they're doing. I think that can be really transformative for them and for our internet.
I think just to build on that, I think we need to understand sort of involvement of people with lived experience, whether that be users in terms of children or in terms of sort of looking at MySpace, looking at survivors of abuse. It's got to be done properly. It's got to be done in a genuine way, and it has to be done in a way that is open to the possibility or the likelihood that those groups will change things, and that they will find things that they do not like, and that need to be changed. I think there is a perception. I think it's seen, I think, almost as a rubber stamp. We'll get some children in, they'll say a speech about X, Y, and Z, and then they'll go away, and then we've ticked that box. It can't be a tick box approach. It's got to be, I think, built in, and I think also it should be seen as an opportunity.
Yes.
So it's going to pay dividends if you get people in at an early stage and give them the chance to really test it, really pull at the threads of the product. It's going to be a better product further down the line. Just a little plug for one of our members, Thorn, who just put out a blog about design, working through AI, looking at different stages. What are the questions you need to ask? And one of the concepts they brought in was red teaming, which in a past life as an analyst I used to use quite a lot. And it's just basically trying to think of all the things that could go wrong. So you have a red team that's basically out there to be the enemy and try and just mess about with the product, do all the things they're not supposed to do, and just test it to the point where you find those gaps. But it's going to be a better product along the line. So I think just ensuring that this is a routine part of development. It's not a rubber stamp that you do at the end. It's not something that you rush, and it's not something that you do on the cheap. It's got to be, I think, just built in the same way as legal permissions, copyright, all those other checks that are along the road of creating a great product.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
And it's quite a good segue. I wanted to carry on asking. I absolutely agree with red teaming. I mean, I used to do cybersecurity a long time ago, and we used to red team absolutely everything. So I know exactly what you mean. But I was interested in getting your perspective as well about the youth involvement from an international perspective, because as you say, it's making sure that we've got the full user base, global user base, global companies. Have you got any ideas about, from your experience at We Protect, about how there might be possibilities and where the best place is to get that international youth involvement?
No, it's a great question. It's something we're trying to invest in at the moment. We did a study looking at youth experience of self-generated sexual material, sending nudes, whatever you wish to call it. But we looked at that phenomenon in Ireland, in Ghana, and in Thailand. 3 ostensibly very different countries, but we were actually amazed by how many similarities we find. And I think that is a lot of these teenagers are using the same platforms, and a lot of them are having the same concerns. And I think the glaring message that came out of that study was that there is a massive disconnect in terms of trust and in terms of understanding between these teenagers and authority figures, whether those be children or definitely teachers or definitely law enforcement, and even parents as well. They just feel like people just do not understand. And there was a really powerful quote. I think it came from one of the Thai teens we interviewed, and they were saying we're caught between two forms of conformist culture. There's the conformity that we're expected with our peer group, so that's about sharing nudes and running the risk of those being leaked. But there's also the conformity culture of wider society, which just doesn't understand how children are exploring their sexuality in the modern world. And I think, so we're looking at geographical diversity, but I think we also need to look at diversity of experience, because what we find, again, loud and clear in all of our research, is that LGBTQI plus children are more vulnerable to sexual harms. Also those who self-define as being of a minority ethnic background, and also those who self-define as being disabled. So, for example, looking at people who are deaf, people who are autistic. So I think we need to take into account of how different groups, different cultures, not treating young people as a monolith and looking at those different experiences. But I think, all that said, there's a surprising amount of common ground globally, which I think took me by surprise, actually.
Yeah. Now I'm just going to give people, a bit like Stephen did, come up with some questions from the floor, because I'm just going to ask a few more questions and I'll come back to you, so to give you the opportunity for us to throw that microphone around. But I really wanted to come back to the panel and really, as we're thinking about the future, and we were talking about licensing earlier, potentially. Someone was saying in the future, maybe people would need to be licensed before they could sign these things off. And I was just interested in hearing the panel's view, to get as many people's views about where those license decision makers would lie. Actually, I think it was somebody who said decision makers. I think it was you, actually, Tricia, who said it's clear about decision makers. And it made me think very much around, well, actually, do we want the engineers to be licensed, or do we want the actual decision makers who are signing off to be licensed? And I'm interested in hearing your views and whether or not you've got an opinion about whether or not we should have a much more structured license-based approach to these sorts of things, or standards-based.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, as many people as possible, or as many subgroups as possible. If it's just relying on one group, whether a legal team or an engineering group, you're not understanding the unintended consequences or whatever forthcoming challenges may be. So, if we had a magic wand, so that we'd be able to deploy something and it'd be reviewed and tested and get real-time feedback from a whole bunch of people with different lived experiences and different perspectives. I think as the industry member here, I guess making sure that internally and externally we engage with as many people as possible is still a way to get this. And it's not, again, to rubber stamp something at the end, but to get people at the ideation stage and build early the right type of features that would be seen as useful. So I think that's the responsibility that we take anyway, which is to engage through the NGOs we work with, our Safety Advisory Council, the Youth Council, and then internally, I think having, somebody said earlier on that with AI, that it changes the role of TNS, that you're no longer that team because you've got those insights and you've got, that power. I think TNS is not bottom of the list in that pile. TNS has the expertise, the red teaming, has all the scars. They need to be heard, first and foremost, because they are defending those diverse viewpoints from people who may be surviving trauma, or young people who just want to have a good time on the app.
Yeah. And I'm going to go to Alex, actually, because you were talking about gamifying, and it made me think similar about licensing. And actually, that was a great idea about the potential of opening up features upon that base. And I just wanted to get your opinion on whether or not we should have licenses for coders, or where that should sit, or any ideas about how you think it could be more structured, I suppose, in the way that we were talking about civil engineering.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting question. And, I think one of the things that was touched on in another panel as well was that global aspect of the internet. And, it always made me laugh, as much as I love our previous Secretary of State, Nadine Dorris, because she took me to the canteen for jerk chicken in Parliament. She did used to bang out about the fact that it's going to make the UK the safest place to be in the world on the internet, which has never made sense to me, really. And I think there's a big sort of, and sorry I know there's some of the department's representatives in the room today, but I think there's still that big thing of, I see a lot of great industry groups, whether it's We Protect, Technology Coalition, Spectrum, there's lots of other great groups that people are sort of volunteering and being part of, but we're seeing a real vacuum of leadership within governments and actually coming up with some of these frameworks, because you'll find most of the companies do have these frameworks and decision-making frameworks, or perhaps standards, but they're having to maybe, at the moment, coordinate some of that themselves by joining these groups. And yes, regulation might go some of the way, but not if it's very isolated. So I wouldn't be in favor of necessary licensing or that sort of formal approach, but I would be in favor of more exploratory work, across sort of countries in terms of getting to those standards. But, I think I have to reflect on the fact that when I first started this work, there'd be a lot of companies that would avoid being at the table, avoid joining these sort of industry membership groups or coming on panels like this. And I think we've come a long way now where they are choosing to be part of those discussions. So, what we do need now, I think, is the regulation, the government part, to sort of come in line with that, so that future Secretary of States, and we've had, I think, 7 or 8 working on the bill in the UK, perhaps don't have to come up with some of their own bright ideas, which aren't always so bright.
Thank you. Now, do we have anyone that I can't really see up there? Do we have anyone who has any questions? Yeah.
It's very bright.
Do we have any questions from the floor? Yes, we do have someone. Sorry, I'm going to ask you to throw it up there again.
Oh, no.
How far are you trying to throw it? There's one here.
Right here? Okay. Don't judge me.
Sorry for anyone further up. You might have to shout.
Oh, not so bad.
Yeah, very good.
Of course, okay.
That's it.
Hi.
Point.
Just a lot of people think end-to-end encryption is going to be a serious challenge for the future of online safety. Does the panel have any, possibly further present as well? Panel got any thoughts on that?
I'm going to throw that to Tricia first, because I'm interested, actually, because you're absolutely right. There's been lots of conversations about end-to-end encryption, and particularly protecting children. And I want to hear, what is the youth voice, and what is your opinion about, whether or not there is a threat?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. And, when I think about that question, and particularly the youth perspective, I think about a lot of tension, right, and competing perspectives here, because, I was 13 when the Snowden revelations happened. Yes, and so we were very much born into, an era of questions about to what extent, should the government or any entity, yes, be able to have access, to certain types of information, and where should there be lines drawn? I mean, I think that it's incredibly important that as I think Vicky said on the last panel, we take, and I think most young people feel this way, that we take every privacy-preserving measure that we possibly can, that we minimize data as much as we can. And I think one thing I'll say on this is it's incredibly important that as we're building to protect young people, we are also not robbing them of privacy, yes? And so I do think that that is really, really key. At the same time, I don't think that it has to be all or nothing. Do you know what I mean? Right? And I think that sometimes these conversations will end up leading us down a path of, well, I guess there's just nothing we can do, you know? Like, let's just throw our hands up and go home, right? So I think with end-to-end encryption, it's an incredibly important issue. I don't think that we should be, encroaching on young people's privacy. I think that we should be really careful not to rob young people of rights simply because they're minors. And we see this in a lot of other spaces. At the same time, I think we should be really careful to not let just that talking point in isolation prevent us from investing in other technical solutions, which there are plenty. Whether it's product changes, as we've talked about, or other types of technology that are preventative, or regulation that is preventative, that can ultimately put youth interests at the center of the digital experience. So it's a tightrope, and I think most young people would agree that it's a tightrope, right? It's a very tricky issue. But I would just be careful to not lean in one direction too far. I think.
Right, and that was a good segue over to maybe a different opinion. I'm not sure. It'd get interesting to get your view.
Well, I think just to build on that, and I think on your point, Alex, about incentives, I think we need to be trying to incentivize people to do the right thing, and I think we need to. End-to-end encryption is happening. There's Telegram, there's Signal, there's WhatsApp. It's there, it's out there, so we need to deal with it. I think we also need to recognize there's the privacy of victims and survivors of abuse, and the privacy of vulnerable users, as well as the user base at large, and ensuring that we're having a sophisticated understanding of that. But I think we need to avoid perverse incentives where we're creating the conditions where the best thing to do is to just look the other way. And that's not what we want. We want companies to feel that they are in a safe space to look for material, to look for bad behavior happening on their platforms, and for them not to be punished for doing the right thing and looking for that and addressing it. So I think we need to try and have a sophisticated understanding of how this is developing. And I think part of the issue is the debate has got very polarized, and we talked about some of the culture war issues. I don't think that's conducive to delivering a safer environment for children. If people are throwing memes at each other, if I see another Simpsons meme about someone think of the children, that's not how we should be dealing with this. It's not goodies and baddies. It's about dealing with an absolutely an incredibly complex, wicked problem that we all need to be collaborating on addressing.
I'm just interested in getting Alex's view on end-to-end encryption as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Ian, and I think not to bash the UK more, but some of our politicians, from the Home Office and digital and so on, they love the encryption debate because they do want to paint it as this is the evil companies and they don't want to look after children, and it's not as simple as that. And I think particularly some of these MPs absolutely love encryption services. That you should see their WhatsApps, the conversations they have. But I think more importantly, we need to think a little bit more sensibly about it, because for something like the encryption debate, it's something that gets on in the front of newspapers and gets in the headlines. But I think for the public, they need to understand a little bit more about what comes with the pros and the cons of that. So I would love to explore that a little bit further if we had more time.
Great, thank you. We have another question behind you, John, so just throw it behind you there, Giles. Nope.
I think I could stretch that far.
Maybe we could just lower the light so that man's blushing. Is it good?
Just a quick question on the ability to opt out. I was keen to understand the panel's position on if somebody wants to opt out from a particular feature that a platform is rolling out. I think Alex touched on it earlier on about a certain social media app that decided it was a good idea to roll out a My AI chatbot, no names mentioned. But I've spoken to a lot of young people over the past couple of months since that particular feature was rolled out, and many of them were asking, why can't I turn that off? Why does that have to be active on my account? I don't particularly want to use that element of the app, but there's no way to turn it off unless you upgrade and you pay a subscription. Now, it's my understanding that more of the platforms are going to roll out these types of features. Are young people going to have the ability to opt out? But not just young people. Can any of us opt out if we don't want access to these features? And that's something that I feel should be discussed and should be talked about, and even should be considered at rollout stage. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to look at you, Judy, for this one. Being industry, I mean, what do you think about how customizable should a platform be to enable people to do these sorts of things?
Yeah, I think we're trying to get the best of both worlds, right? Ultimate customization, where people who are on the app or on the service just want lots of new ways to make their experience very personal, and at the same time, some things that should be there, regardless, and that you perhaps should not be able to turn off when it comes to some of the basic safety stuff. We don't design products the way, I think that this particular service has designed this feature, so it's hard for me to comment on future things. I haven't seen anything that speaks to, that type of opt-out thing. I don't think that's how we've been thinking about, best practices. And again, going back to the points that we were making before and really listening intently to what people want, that's what we've been trying to do, which is to give, hopefully, delightful experiences and to build those features for them, not to force one path.
Thank you. Go ahead.
One thing that comes to mind for me, kind of related, that I think is important, we've touched on this earlier in the panel too, is where there are customizable features, making them easy to use and access. I think that's one thing that was mentioned that I think we can see, there's room for growth there potentially. I actually run an online column that basically I source questions from young people anonymously about challenges that they're experiencing online, then provide them expert vetted advice, actually in the form of TikTok videos and and blog posts. And some of the questions that I'll get are just questions at times about, a setting or a feature that's there, but it's really hard to get to, And so from customizability, I think one component of the question which is raised is, can you make the change, but also how are those tools and features made available to the user base, right? Especially a young person who, if they're not able to find it in 20 seconds, will not do it. You know what I mean? Like that's, it's just, okay, I can't, if it's not instant, I'm not going to do it. So I think that's just another layer to consider, and an area, right, for listening and for changes, and for making changes that will hopefully make things more accessible and give especially young users more agency as they're using the services.
Great, Alex.
Yeah, I think with some examples, there was a bit of a race to use AI and get it out, and I think that maybe demonstrated the sort of product teams, excitement over maybe trust and safety. But I think lessons have been learned with that, and there's definitely feedback across the board on that. We actually discussed this day recently on Spotify's council about how the use of AI in the platform, and our recommendation was to exactly that users may or should be able to turn that off or have some control over that. So that was certainly one of our recommendations. Whether it will see it through, I don't know. But yeah, I definitely welcome that ability to be able to toggle some of those features potentially, because I think that's important, and particularly when we think about a lot of platforms now are starting to maybe look further at different age groups and what a 13-year-old could maybe have access to versus 16, or what those features are, and I think that's a fine balance in terms of not limiting young people's access to broadcast, to potentially influence in a really positive way, but at the same time, adding some controls there. But I think it's about to get a lot more complicated, particularly as we think about age classification on certain pieces of content and how companies are going to come to some of those decisions and frameworks around that. But I'm definitely in favour of not being forced to have every sort of feature or AI or sort of update put on you, particularly as a young person.
Thank you. Now we've got a couple of time for some more questions. Do we have any more questions from the floor? Everyone's a bit shy late in the day. I've got a few, actually, just off the back of that. I'm interested to get your people's views. We're talking about protecting users' data, particularly youth data. But some of the things we've been talking about, design choice, etc. You need to know who's using that, how old they are, what use cases they're aiming for, and it seems like quite a tricky balance. And I'm just interested in hearing the panel's views on whether or not, particularly I was going to focus in on anonymity, always a tricky thing to say, and how that balance works in practice, because it sounds like there's lots of cases to argue for each of those points, but where does the balance lie, do you think, between having that data use, the anonymity online, being able to know how old your users are? I'm going to throw that open to you first.
Wow, big question in 3 minutes. Yeah. Well, I don't think we're going to solve it today, and I think this is the debate of the last 20 years on how do we achieve this. It's been funny to see how the industry has moved from platforms that are completely anonymous, and perhaps we're seen as a way to provide a service, and things may have changed, to platforms that insist on having your real identity. I don't know, I think we've been trying to have an authentic identity on the platform and make sure that we again provide ways for people to disclose who they are, and if they haven't quite disclosed right, that we remove their account or detect their account, and then they have the ability to appeal. But I think this balance of safe anonymous spaces versus giving a lot of data to say who you are is a difficult one. We don't require a huge amount of data for your account to go and start watching content and consuming it. I think that's the direction that we have adopted on data minimization. But on the age verification, I'm sure we could be here next year and still have big discussions on this topic, so yet to be solved.
It's great. Now, I'm conscious we've just got a little bit of time, and I want to give everybody the opportunity of just putting the future as you would like to see it in just a couple of lines. Where would you like us to be in online safety in, say, 5 years' time? And I'll start with the other end, Tricia. Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
No. Where would I like to see online safety in 5 years? I would like to see online safety led by a diverse coalition of people from different backgrounds, geographies, perspectives, that are working together in good faith to consider how we can find the balance between the good that the internet has to offer and some of the harms, and that take, as Ian mentioned so well earlier in the panel, that take a really nuanced, sophisticated approach to safety. And I think that we're on track to do that. I think some of the technologies that we've talked about are going to enable that, but enable us to go beyond really a monolithic approach to moderation and trust and safety, to a really diverse, sophisticated, nuanced approach.
Great. I think I've asked you this question before, Alex, in our time together, but where do you want us to be in 5 years?
I think one thing I would love, I was always struck when, in the good days of Twitter's Trust and Safety Council, before someone came along, I was always interested in, I asked Jack Dorsey, when's the last time you had a conversation with Mark Zuckerberg about safety? You know what? He said never. Never spoken to him about safety. And I think that's sad. I would like to, maybe like the future, I would like tech executives, founders to actually, talk to each other, because it's really important at the top that they are prioritizing that safety conversation. But I think maybe beyond that, just if we were to dream about maybe Safer Internet Day 2025, perhaps the vision would be all users on that day would be encouraged. Whichever platform wants to go first, talk to me. I'm available afterwards to discuss consultation fees. Every user is encouraged to take some sort of safety course. No, you'll make it work. You'll make it exciting, and then a badge or something is displayed, or some sort of unlocked feature. I'd be really excited to get to the point where you're on the platform and you don't have to go searching for safety features, or you don't have to read a corporate blog to discover that something, has come out, that actually it becomes sort of fabric, a part of the platform, and people can earn badges or different levels. You can upskill yourself, level up, and really teach yourself some stuff around safety, because I think I see lots of offline approaches, really exciting things, but there's not much that platforms have built that maybe could become a sort of signature model that gives users some exciting way to understand how to keep their friends, the platforms that they love, safer and make them even healthier. I think I'd be really excited to see that.
Thank you. And Ian?
I'm going to be trying to be super brief. I think there's 5 years, 3 things: preventative, collaborative, routine.
Like that. Great.
Well done, that was short.
Yeah.
And Julie, from your perspective?
I think the most beautiful products are the ones that are the most, that are the easiest to use. I'd love this to be intuitive, built-in, seamless. And that just as, if a family is looking at buying a car and they just buy because it's safe, that it's seen as a really good thing. Like, safe is not boring, and safe is not the opposite of fun, but that you could say this, that is something worth investing in because it is safe.
Brilliant, and a great line to finish on. Safety is not boring, everybody. Okay, and please put your hands together and thank the great panel. Thank you.